Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. This week, we'll be talking about John Constantine Hellblazer Volume 2, The Devil You Know, by Jamie Delano. This is the second volume of the original Hellblazer series. A lot of you in the comments suggested this back when me and Luke covered Hellblazer Volume 1, over a year ago now, so it's taken us a long time, but finally got to it, so hope you enjoy. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cultured Pull List, part of the Cultured Nerd Universe podcast network. As usual, I'm your host, Mike, but if you're new, welcome. In this show, we talk about all things comic book and graphic novels, as well as comic news, all the new stuff coming out of Marvel, DC, everything else. But we also review a specific book every week, every episode, and kind of tie that into other adaptations like an animation, video games, or movies, and kind of see what the differences are and kind of, get down into the source material. So yeah, if that sounds like something you're interested in, welcome, glad you found me. Now, this week, as you can still tell from the title, we're doing John Constantine Hellblazer Volume 2. And this is something I have wanted to get into for a while, but I've kind of just been doing a lot of other stuff recently. And yeah, it's been about a year since we covered Volume 1, so if you want to check that out, link in the description and little banner up top right now. But yeah, so we're finally getting to it. I'm really glad because I'm a really big John Constantine fan, and I love rereading comics with Constantine because I always imagine Matt Ryan's voice in my head. He's just like just the perfect Constantine in my mind in live action and, in animated form. He's one of the few actors that I know of that's really portrayed the same character over multiple shows and multiple mediums, including live action and animation. He was, Constantine in the DC animated universe, and he played him in the newly rebooted Tomorrowverse as well. He's just basically, since the 2015 show, he's been Constantine. So that's I always just have his voice in my head when I'm reading a Constantine book. But before we get into the actual nitty gritty of the book here, I did want to mention a few things. One, it's not exactly major news, but it is just kind of something I wanted to address. So if you have been following Chip Zdarsky's Batman run like I have over the last year or so, you'll probably want to know that Batman number 157 is actually going to be his last book in this run, which is kind of a shame because I have really been enjoying his run overall, but at the same time, it's like writers only stay with the same book for so long. So it's understandable. And I will say what's coming next is really cool. So after Chip Zdarsky and Jorge Jimenez are done with their Batman run, Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee are coming back to Batman to bring us Batman Hush 2, which is very cool. I mean, it's amazing seeing Jim Lee's art again with Hush, and I'm very curious to see what they do with this, because I'm not sure what you could do. Hush has popped up a few times since the Hush storyline, but I'm very curious what they'll do with a whole nother Hush-focused storyline. I'm very excited. Jeff Loeb's, an iconic Batman writer, and Jim Lee is one of my favorite comic artists ever, especially the stuff he's done with DC the last 10, 20 years. So I'm very excited for this. I'm definitely, I'm sad to see Chip Zdarsky go, but I'm very excited for Hush number 2, or Batman Hush 2. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that. Batman 157 is coming out. I think it's delayed a little bit, so it's not coming out till February. But Hush 2, I believe, is probably coming out the following March. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure if there's an actual release date for Hush 2 yet. But yeah, so that's that. Also, something I want to start doing with this show, I want to mention all of the new comics that have come out this past week, because for those of you who aren't aware, comics come out every Wednesday for the most part, and This show comes out on Fridays, so I kind of want to talk about just, the new comics that came out a couple days ago every week. I'm only gonna do Marvel and DC and Image for now, but if you want more, if you want me to cover more publishers, let me know in the comments. But yeah, so first off is Marvel. And I'm only gonna, there's always a lot, so I'm only gonna mention the main titles here. And this is from the website Cover Price, which, by the way, I've found very useful over the last couple years. But yeah, so Venom #1 that came out, and this is a key issue because it's the introduction of the all new Venom symbiote with an unrevealed host. So this is in the fallout of the Venom War miniseries, which I have not finished, by the way. But yeah, so I guess there's a new Venom because Eddie Brock, spoilers, Eddie Brock is going to be the new Carnage. So yeah, very interesting what they're going to do with Venom. Then we have Avengers #21 and Conquest 2099 #4. This is also a key issue because it's the first appearance of Ghost Spider 2099, or Gwen Stacy. Then there's Marvel Zombies: The Dawn of Decay #4. There's Deadpool Wolverine Weapon Extraction #1. And Miles Morales Spider-Man #27. And this is, I think, the third issue that we've seen him in his vibranium suit, so that's cool. There's also the Ultimates #7. I really need to get caught up on that series because it's been really cool. Wolverine #4, the new series from Saladin Ahmed. And there's X-Force #6, which is also a key issue because it's the first appearance of La Diabla, I guess a new character. And then there's X-Men #8, which seems to be a crossover with the Uncanny X-Men title because Rogue's in it and she's been leading the Uncanny X-Men team. So that's Marvel. For DC, we have Absolute Superman #2, which Absolute Superman #1 was awesome. This is a key issue as well because it's the second cameo appearance of Absolute Brainiac. Then we have Action Comics #1078. I haven't really been keeping up with Action Comics since, I guess, since Philip Kennedy Johnson came off the title. And then we have Batman #155, just 2 issues away from the end of Chip Zdarsky's run, and it looks like he's brought in like the Court of Owls again, as well as everything that's been going on with the Riddler. So that should be pretty cool. I can't wait to get my hands on that. And then there is JSA #2. There's Silent Night Returns, Batman Santa Claus Silent Night Returns #2. And then there's Creature Commandos #3, just in time for the premiere of the Creature Commandos animated series. And that's all like the major DC titles. Then there's Image. Now there's Gunslinger Spawn #38, The Walking Dead Deluxe #102, and what's the furthest place from here #20. Now there are obviously some other titles that came out, but I just don't have the time to list like everything. But those were the highlights, I think. Let me know if you think I missed anything. But yeah, that's all the new comics from this week. Let's get into Constantine, or I guess technically Hellblazer. So, for those of you unaware, Constantine actually first appeared in Swamp Thing #37. And he was actually originally created by Alan Moore, Steve Bissette, and John Toltben, who actually the artists came to Alan Moore because they wanted to base a character that looked like Sting apparently. So that's kind of that's where Constantine's original look came from, was 1980s Sting. But then, he was in a few Swamp Thing issues after that, and then his own Hellblazer series started with Jamie Delano, and Jamie Delano really took the character and kind of, in a lot of ways, made him the character he is today, and kind of fleshed out a lot of his origin, like the stuff with Newcastle and all that stuff. So where we last left off with Hellblazer a while ago, Swamp Thing showed up at Constantine's apartment and wanted to take over his body so he could have relations with Abby Arcane, or I guess Abby Cable because she married Matt, and basically bring about like this messianic child that's going to save the Green, or something along those lines. It was kind of a little vague, but even though Constantine kind of agrees to the idea, Swamp Thing kind of takes his body by force, and John kind of ends up floating, in wherever, in limbo. And also, a little before this, John had been really hurt, and the demon Nergal which I called him Nurgle a lot last time, but I think it's Nergal. He has been chasing John because he is the demon that is part of this whole Newcastle thing, which we'll cover in this episode. But he found John and he like healed him by injecting him with some of his demonic power. And then John ended up finding Zed, who had been recaptured by the Resurrection Crusaders. And the whole thing with Zed is they want her to mate with an angel and bring about their own like savior. And Nergal wants to stop that, so he forces John to go to Zed and sleep with her, and put some of his demonic power in her, so that the angel will reject her and all that. And and in the whole resurrection crusade ritual won't work. So that's where we're at. John is just kind of floating in limbo. That's where we pick up, and that's all you really need to know. If you haven't watched, last episode, if you want to know who Zed is, that was all covered last episode that we did. So check that out if you want to know all the nitty gritty of what's going on. But let's get into it. So Hellblazer Volume 2, The Devil You Know, was written by Jamie Delano, with art by David Lloyd, Richard Piers Rayner, Brian Talbot, Dean Motter, and John Cassidy, who did the cover art. And then we have the inkers, who are Mark Buckingham, Mike Hoffman, Brian Talbot, and David Lloyd. Colorists were Laverne Kinzierski and Dean Motter. And the letterers were Todd Klein, Alita Fell, and Dean Motter. Now, this collection actually collects Hellblazer numbers 10 through 13, and then it also collects Hellblazer Annual number 1 and this 2-issue miniseries, The Horrorist, which isn't technically part of the Hellblazer title, but it's written by Jamie Delano and kind of goes in hand, but we'll see once we get to it. But these were released between 1988 and January 1996, which is when The Horrorist came out. So yeah, a lot to cover today. This is going to be a bit of a doozy. So this book picks up right where issue 9 left off, where Swamp Thing has Constantine's body, and Constantine's spirit, soul, whatever, is just kind of, or I guess technically his astral form, is just kind of floating around. And it takes him a while to get his bearings and figure out what's going on. But then he remembers, Swamp Thing's got my body. And so he just kind of starts floating around, exploring things, and he ends up going to Zed and witnessing the Resurrection Crusaders doing this, the whole ritual with Zed. But as Nergal expected, the angel shows up and doesn't take kindly to the demonic presence inside her. So the angel has a bit of a temper tantrum and kills all the Resurrection Crusaders, including Zed, unfortunately. So that's another death on Constantine's conscience. So then we cut to Nergal. He's doing demonic things, like demons do. And then he feels like this sense in the green and realizes that John's body with Nergal's power in it is being used to make, the Swamp Thing child, and this will make the green even more powerful and fulfill some prophecy that Nergal doesn't want. I think it's basically going to fulfill the prophecy that the Resurrection Crusaders wanted to happen, which is what Nergal wanted to prevent to begin with. So he's not very happy, so he sends these hellhound things after John, who runs for his life, as fast as he can as an astral projection, and ends up back into his own body, because that's like the only safe place he can go. And it just so happens to be mid relations with Abby. So in the middle of that, he pops up and says, oh, hey, it's me, I'm John, I'm back. And Abby isn't too pleased, but she gets over it. And I believe this issue takes place a little before, I think, issues like 88, 89 of Swamp Thing that we covered in our Swamp Thing episode, because it seems like Constantine, now that he's got his body back, hangs out for a while and he kind of resolves things with Abby, and she isn't mad at him anymore. But in this issue, before all that, Swamp Thing kind of sends John on his way and tells him that Nergal left a message for him saying, "Remember Newcastle." So that's fun. We'll see what Newcastle is coming up. I think it's been mentioned before, but now we're actually going to see it in the next issue. So John goes back to his home and he finds his friends and his landlord and his neighbors have all been murdered, seemingly by Nergal. So John goes to his case files, and finds the one for Newcastle, 1978. And that brings us to the next issue, which is John goes back to Newcastle, and we see what the whole what all the hoopla is about Newcastle. So John goes back, and he goes back to the Casanova Club, which is where the whole Newcastle events took place. But right now it's a old junkyard for cars, and an auto junkyard. But John is still able to remember everything that happens, and we, the readers, see it all. And we're introduced to the Newcastle crew. We've been introduced to most of them before in like the Swamp Thing and Hellblazer comics. A lot of the friends in this have all been killed by various means. Some of them were Nergal, so some of them, like Gary Lester, were more a combination of, drugs and being the host of a hunger demon. So yeah, fun stuff. Great way to go. But anyway, so we're introduced to the Newcastle crew. There's Frank. He's I think the only American on the team, and then there's Judith, Anne Marie. Then we have Richie Simpson, who we saw last volume. He's kind of a computer geek, but he's combined like technology and magic. Then there's Gary Lester, like I mentioned earlier, and there's Benjamin, who's like this 12-year-old genius. But all of them are kind of a group of magic, like they're all into magic and the occult, but they're also all part of a band called Mucous Membrane. So yeah, that's the crew. And they go to the Casanova Club, which is, I believe, their first gig, but their friend, John's friend Ray, senses some messed up stuff, some weird stuff going on in the astral plane at the Casanova Club. So the group go there to investigate, and they knock on the door. Nobody's there. Oh yeah, the owner of the club, Alex Logue, is known to have these how do I put it gently? Orgies. And it's been kind of known to use his magic to like throw these really lavish parties to do that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of context. Also, before we go forward, there is some talk about, there is some sexuality and obviously magic occult stuff in this, so obviously, be forewarned. If you are uncomfortable with any of that stuff, then you probably shouldn't watch the rest of this. I'm not going to go into extreme detail, but I'm not going to, censor too much either. So yeah, they go into the club because nobody answers the door, so they kick it open and they find this horrific display of carnage, just bodies strewn everywhere. They're not sure what's going on, but then they see Alex Logue, the owner's daughter, Astra, just kind of dancing around like nothing's going on. There's always something wrong with her. So they calm her down and get talking to her. And apparently, what happened was her dad would kind of force her to participate in his parties and, do really messed up stuff with his party guests. And one night, this night in particular, she just had enough, and she called upon like the most, awful power she could think of to come save her. And it just so happened that it did, but it killed everybody in the party. And it's in the form of this like giant demonic dog that ends up trying to attack Benjamin, but they're able to fight it off. But they realize they really need to get rid of this entity. And John has the bright idea to conjure a stronger demon to come and take care of this demonic force. And the ritual that he's going to perform is supposed to give him power over this demon, so that's why he thinks, it's no big deal. So John and Judith get started on setting up the ritual, and Anne Marie keeps a watch over Astra in a protective circle. And I believe it was one of the guys, I think Richie, sets up explosives. Richie or Frank sets up explosives around the club, so they're gonna blow it up once their whole thing goes down. And it's also just kind of a fail-safe. But not everybody's on board with this plan, but it still goes through anyway. So John starts to summon, the demon he thinks he knows he can summon. And what ends up happening is, well, nothing at first. It seems like nothing happens, but then Anne Marie starts seeing visions of John beckoning to her, and she has feelings for John, so she ends up leaving Astra alone to follow this vision. And then Astra comes down while John is still trying to perform the ritual, and she brings the like demon dog thing with her. But it turns out that John had actually summoned a demon, but he had used the wrong name, kind of botched the ritual a bit, so he didn't actually have power over this demon. So the demon went inside and possessed Astra, and then killed this like demonic wolf dog thing. But now it wants to take Astra down to hell, as payment for taking care of the demonic force for them. And it also reveals like it's really messed up true, like at least one of its forms, and it's definitely hard to look at. But John tries to bargain with the demon, but it doesn't budge. It wants Astra. So it does say that John can go down and take her to hell, personally. So John starts to do that, but then he tries to run and escape with Astra, but it doesn't work. And when he runs out of the club, he ends up only having Astra's arm in his hand. The rest of Astra is still down in hell, and before John can go back in to try and save her again, the guys blow up the club. So Astra is gone. She has been taken down to hell by this demon, and the whole Newcastle crew is just horribly haunted by this. None more so than John, who regularly checks himself into Ravenscar Mental Hospital. And as we come back to the present, John is outside in the junkyard where the Casanova Club used to be, and he sees the ghosts of his many dead friends. I think pretty much all of the Newcastle crew is dead at this point. But yeah, and then he just kind of walks away. But now he knows the demon's name. He knows that the demon Nergal that's been hunting him is the same demon that took Astra. So now he thinks he can fight it because he knows its name. So next we see that John has been hiding out in the junkyard this whole time in his old trailer, using magic to hide himself, but his body is kind of falling apart because of the power Nergal put into him. But then John gets this weird bill that is like for $20,000, and it turns out it's a message from his friend Richie, who isn't actually dead. He's just floating out like in cyberspace somewhere, or his consciousness is. So Richie calls John, and John says that he needs Richie's help to kill Nergal, and Richie kind of has a part of a plan cooked up. So he sends a bunch of equipment to John. Meanwhile, Nergal is trying to find John, and then he's visited by these two demons called Agony and Ecstasy, and they basically say that his time to deal with John is up, and he's going to have to go back to hell and pay for his failure. But Nergal is like, no, I can still take care of John, and John sends Nergal a message to come find him. So he's like, all right, so this is just give me one more chance to kill John. And they're like, all right, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. But if you fail, then we're going to really, you're going to be in real trouble. So Nergal shows up at John's little trailer and tries to attack him, but he soon realizes that it's not actually John in John's body. It's actually Richie, and John is now in cyberspace, and he taunts Nergal to come find him. So stupidly, Nergal does. He goes into the cyberspace and, chases after John, but John is able to keep away from him for long enough where it's not 100% like, she explained how, but basically Richie had found through like magic and travel and combining that with traveling through like cyberspace, basically, he's able to find like the edge of heaven. So John, this whole time, had been tricking Nergal to follow him to the edge of heaven, and an angel shows up and destroys Nergal and then leaves John alone. So John has vanquished Nergal, at least this time, but when he tries to come out back into his body, Richie isn't so keen on letting John back and wants to take John's body. But John explains to Richie that his body's dying because of Nergal's power, his curse. So he convinces Richie to put his consciousness in Nergal's body and put John back in his own body. So that's exactly what happens. Richie goes into Nergal's body, but now he's got these crazy powers that go along with being in Nergal's body. But then Agony and Ecstasy show up and they capture Richie because he can't just be running around in a demon's body with all this power. So they say that they have to take him to hell and have him train with his new powers for at least 10,000 years. So even though Richie's not technically dead, he's down in hell. So yeah, last we see of Richie probably ever. So yeah, next thing we see John after this, he's just kind of, I guess, recovering from all that, kind of resting on his laurels a bit. So he goes to the old beach where his family used to go to when he grew up. And I will say this is a really weird issue. So then, he just has a bunch of memories of the beach, but when he actually gets there, he sees that there's been a new nuclear power plant built nearby, and there's a bunch of protesters who aren't too happy about it. So as John sits on the beach, he sees, the protesters, and he sees this guy come to the beach with his girlfriend, and the guy apparently works at the nuclear plant, and just complaining to his girlfriend about the protesters and stuff. But then something crazy happens, and the nuclear plant just blows up out of nowhere, killing a bunch of the seagulls and irradiating the whole beach. And for some reason, a lot, like pretty much everybody on the beach except for John and the factory worker's the plant worker's girlfriend, go like just into the water, into the beach, and die, or into the water towards the power plant and die. So only John and the girlfriend are left, and they're horribly affected by the radiation, and their bodies are like falling apart. But they still stay together and have a baby together, even though she dies in childbirth. And the baby is this weird two-headed seal pup. So yeah, that's interesting. And the seal pup jumps, away and tries to get into the water, but it's attacked by a bunch of these skeleton seagulls, and they end up killing the seal pup. And John's upset because he felt like having a child, or even though it's a seal, a two-headed seal, was like somehow some form of immortality. So he's upset about that, and he ends up just kind of wasting away and becoming a skeleton and collapsing into the water. And then he wakes up because that was just a really weird nightmare. And that's the whole issue. So next issue, we see John in Ravenscar. He's checked himself in again. For obvious reasons, he's been through some pretty crazy stuff lately. But then we see him check out. So he's been there a while, and I guess he'd only been away for 6 months before he came back. So yeah, he's obviously not doing the greatest, but he goes back to London, his stomping ground, and he meets an old friend who's become this record producer, but he's just like become this really like horrible, corrupt person. And he gives John a ride, but then kind of kicks him out. I was like, hey, I need to go do drugs with my friends. So then John meets some random woman who's like nice to him, and they end up going back to his place and having a happy time. And afterwards, when John's sleeping, he has this really weird dream involving a ship and this boar, and then this transforms into like this long dream that seems like it actually happened, but it's about John's old ancestor, King Constantine, spelled like Kon dash yeah, whatever. It's spelled very strangely. King Constantine's old.
He's gay, but he has a special connection to classical music.
But he just kind of old and ready to be done with everything. So he goes down to his basement and finds his prisoner, the head of the wizard Merlin, and he forces Merlin to sing this song about Constantine's past. And Merlin reveals that Constantine is, I believe, the grandson of King Arthur. And I think in this history, King Arthur and Morgan Le Fay had a child, and then I think that child had Constantine, and Constantine was like a really proven himself to be a really cruel ruler, but Constantine doesn't like the way that Merlin is portraying the story, so he sets Merlin's head on fire and continues the story himself. Well, yeah, and that's a major thing too. Constantine is finally dying, and he had been able to stave off death for a long time, which we'll see why later. But yeah, so Constantine, he's victorious. You know, he's like this really, handsome king, but he's also kind of the worst, and he really hates this religious group. Well, I guess the religious group hates him. They're kind of supposed to be Christians because they're called like followers of the one God or something, and it's very kind of apparent. Like this whole thing is kind of a weird, twisted version, I think, of like Emperor Constantine, and how he made Christianity the officially sanctioned religion of the Holy Roman Empire, though this seems to take place centuries after that, the historical Constantine. But anyway, so Constantine goes on these crusades across the sea, just kind of wants to see the rest of the world, but he ends up being boarded by these pirates. They cut off his arm and throw him overboard, but he's saved by these magical women on this island, and he even ends up falling in love with their queen. And I guess he's introduced to the mother, who's this magical entity, and he kind of like devotes his life to her and learns magic. And Constantine gets a new silver arm from these women, these magical people, and he ends up falling in love with their queen, like I said, and they have a child. I guess they're kind of supposed to be fairies. I'm not 100% sure. And yeah, but then he ends up taking the child and leaving and going back to his kingdom. And we learn that once the child is old enough, once he's 19, he sacrifices the kid to the mother, this entity, to, I guess, stave off his own death. And then we see years later, he's done that a couple times with other children. He's lived for a long time, but he ends up having a disagreement with Merlin, and he ends up using magic to burn Merlin's body, and only his head is left. So that's how we see Merlin now. Yeah, so Constantine lives for years and years and years, has lots of kids, keeps sacrificing them to stave off his own death. And finally, we come to like, well, I think the final child he has, at least it seems like it, and he takes him personally to see the mother, but this time Constantine goes in to see her himself, and she's like this old hag looking lady, and they have relations. And then once Constantine is done, he comes out, and his son is killed to, sacrifice him as he normally does. And yeah, then later we see Constantine meet, well, I guess he captures and then meets with the leader or one of the priests of the one god religion, and he says that he wants his kingdom to be converted to the one god religion. But what he's actually doing is kind of perverting their religion, because he builds a bunch of new temples for them, but he puts a bunch of like the blood of the mother's sons, I guess is what they call it. So he taints it and basically makes them temples to the mother without the one god followers knowing it. And yeah, so he basically becomes not only king but leader of the whole religious aspect of his kingdom as well. And that's kind of where we find him now, and he's pretty much ready to die and I guess be joined with Mother. It's kind of weird and confusing, to be honest with you. But yeah, so he's on death's door and he's ready to die. And then this dragon shows up and comes out of kind of nowhere, and seemingly powered by the mother, and takes King Constantine and flies away with him, and all his religious followers are like, "Oh my gosh, he's ascended! Wow!" And that's, yeah, kind of the end of King, at least this story of King Constantine. And yeah, and I think the boar was somehow involved with this, but I forget how. Yeah, so then we see Constantine, this is like much later. He's looking for an old music video that Mucus Membrane did, and his buddy Chaz shows up and finds the video for him. And the rest of the issue is pretty much just the music video and the song, and it's just it's just kind of typical like punk rock political stuff. And yeah, so that's the end of that. Now we're finally to the horrorist. And I'm going to kind of breeze through this as much as I can because it's kind of long and kind of complicated. But basically, it starts out with this girl sitting on this bench. This mailman guy tries to talk to her, or I'm not sure if he's a mailman or not, but he tries talking to her, and she just says all these morbid things. And then a bunch of kids nearby that are playing get blown up by nothing. Like the ground just explodes for no reason. And then we see John hanging out at this bar. He meets this lady that agrees to go home with him and have fun for money. And then we see this weird scene where this mentally disturbed guy kills another guy in the bar, but John is so like numb and unaffected by this that the only thing he's worried about is getting the guy getting blood on his coat. So John goes home with this lady. Apparently she's a dominatrix, and they do the deed, or at least they start to, but like John just isn't feeling anything, and that freaks the girl out. So John leaves, and then he sees the girl on the bench, like a vision of her, and like for some reason he feels incredibly drawn to her, and he feels like if he finds her, oh yeah, he has this like crazy vision of her. It's like both horrifying and alluring. And when he wakes up, he realizes he must find this girl because he feels like she might be the key to him feeling again. He's just been so like numb, like I guess he's just been through so much shit that he just doesn't have any real feeling of anything anymore, and he's just like numb to everything. So John then sees the girl on this billboard, and he tracks down the photographer, and the photographer says that he found the girl in some, I forget what African country it is, but I don't think he even quite knows. The photographer can't remember, but he says that the girl got adopted by this American family. So John tracks down the family, and only the mother is still surviving. And she explains that they adopted the girl and named her Angel, but a little like years later, some messed up things happened. Like their daughter had anorexia and died, and the father blamed Angel for it and said that he killed her and then killed himself. But John doesn't buy it because he's seen Angel, so he ends up leaving. He performs this like spell. I think it's like a scrying spell, sort of, to find the girl, and he ends up tracking her down to Illinois. Angel, presumed dead, is now like traveling America, and she's now in Illinois where John is tracking her down, and she gets picked up by this trucker, and they see some horrific, it seems like people being carted off in like a train car, which messes up the messes with the truck driver. John goes to this town in Illinois where he feels like, I guess he tracked her down to, and he flips through all of the headlines, and then he sees this guy, the guy that witnessed those kids getting blown up. And so he goes to that guy's house, but his wife says that he hasn't been the same ever since he saw that event, and he should be at work right now. So John tracks him down, but right as he does, the guy sets himself on fire. So then we cut back to Angel. She's arrested for, I guess, just kind of being a vagrant, and she's arrested by the sheriff. And the sheriff does, he forces himself on her and leaves her to die in the snow. Next, we see John traveling by train. He's not really sure 100% where he's going. He's just kind of following the tracks, and eventually he gets kicked off for smoking. But it just so happens to be the same town that the sheriff that we saw earlier is from, and the sheriff, after those events, went crazy and like killed his whole family. So John decides to stay in this town and let Angel come to him. So he finds a small hotel, a motel, and sets up shop there. Then we see Angel almost get hit by this one guy, and then the guy goes home and is obviously affected by Angel because he goes home and what was once a happy home kind of morphs into this horrible nightmare where they don't have any food, they're all emaciated, and the guy ends up taking his daughter to like the red light district in whatever city, probably Chicago, and like sells her. It's pretty messed up. Then we see Angel showing up at the same motel that John's staying at and asks for a job. So she gets a job as a waitress in the adjoining restaurant, as well as a housekeeper in the motel. Then John keeps having weird visions of Angel, and he takes that to mean that she's close. Then we see the photographer who has like gone crazy himself and like gouged his own eyes out, and John sees that on the TV and is like, oh, okay. And I think he starts to put two and two together, like who Angel is and what exactly she is. Then we cut to the restaurant that Angel works at, and she's waiting on this mother and her son, and the mother's like kind of delusional and thinks, I guess, that her I think her older son or her husband or something is going to show up, but the son isn't convinced, and Angel like ends up showing her all of these like horrible visions of hungry, starving people, and then like these masked men show up and try to shoot Angel and the kid and the mom, but Angel saves the kid. But then it turns out it was like a vision by the motel owner, and he wakes up with a mask on and a gun, and he's not sure if he actually did those like horrible things or not, if he murdered people or not, and then he ends up shooting himself. And then Angel goes into John's room, finds him, and John's like, "Ah, he finally found me, hooray!" And he reveals to her that he knows what she is. She's a horrorist, which is basically a person that just is kind of a conduit for all of the horrible pain and suffering in the world, but forces other people to experience it. And this kind of seems to like manifest either in visions or in actual like reality altering. But either way, it seems to drive people crazy and make people either hurt themselves or hurt other people. And it doesn't really seem like it's not really clear whether she does it on purpose or not. It's just sort of like she just does it. And I guess she like experiences all this pain herself. So she just kind of, thrusts it onto other people. And John says that, he wants to feel her power, because he feels like it will stop him from feeling so numb. So yeah, so in this, John says a horrorist is a redistributor of suffering, perpetrating revolutionary outrage in the cozy heartlands of oppression and complacency. So it's basically forcing people that have become complacent to other people's suffering to experience like major all the suffering in the world, and it doesn't usually end well. Angel agrees to show John all this, so she does. And meanwhile, while all these weird visions are happening, they also have um, weird skinless sex. It's very strange. But when John wakes up, it turns out like Angel had given all of her power, all of her energy to John to the point where she dies. But John, after experiencing all that pain and suffering, doesn't feel numb anymore, and actually like it seems like it not only made him like feel his emotions again, but it seemed to make him care more about his fellow humans, his fellow man, and have empathy again. And so when he walks outside and sees the mom who can't find her son, he agrees to help her find her son, and actually like genuinely seems to be distressed in her pain. And that is how this book ends. Kind of a long one, so if you stuck with this, thanks. But yeah, I'm not going to get too in depth because this is already running kind of long, but I think in general I liked volume 1 a little more, and I did like the actual Hellblazer issues better than the Horrorist and the Annual, though I think the Horrorist, I really liked aspects of it. I really liked the whole message, and I thought it was very interesting the way like everybody else how they reacted to angels' powers, feeling all that suffering. A lot of them hurt other people or hurt themselves. Whereas for John, he was already numb, so feeling like he experienced like the full extent of angels' powers. And after feeling all that, he ended up feeling empathy and caring for other people, which I thought was very interesting because in general, he's kind of a guy that is he doesn't really care about other people. At least his mission is more important than caring, than other people, and he's willing to throw people under the bus a lot. So it's kind of interesting that a person like that, after experiencing all that suffering, still feels empathy for other people, whereas everybody else that got affected by Angel's powers killed themselves or killed other people. So I thought that was interesting, and I did like the overarching story of that. I just felt like it was a bit convoluted, I guess, and I feel like that's kind of what I've been experiencing with Jamie Delano's work so far, especially in this volume. I think some stuff that happens, it's just so like random and doesn't really get fully explained, like why is this happening. Maybe I'm just dumb and missing the point. But like there's that whole thing on the beach with the nuclear plant exploding and him having like a two-headed seal baby. Like that just was so random. But I did really like the issues before that. I really liked the Newcastle issue. That was cool seeing how that happened because I knew what happened. I was familiar with the story, but I'd never actually read it for myself. And the whole stuff with, seeing Zed, and the Resurrection Crusaders, like that, the whole Nergal storyline I really liked. The other stuff I didn't like as much. I thought the Constantine story was interesting on its face, but was so again kind of convoluted and kind of hard for me to follow. And at the end of it, I'm kind of wondering like what was kind of the point of that. Maybe further down the series that like comes more into play. But yeah, so I guess overall I'd say this was a bit of a mixed bag. I did like a lot of it, and I think all of the art was really cool. I think all of the artists did a really good job just capturing, the griminess and the messed up stuff, that was going on in these stories. But I would say I only really, really liked about like half of this book. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think. If you're a big Hellblazer fan and you think I'm missing something, let me know in the comments. I mean, I'm a big fan too. But I didn't love probably like the tail end of this. It was kind of up and down for me, but overall I did like it. I mean, it's Constantine, it's cool, but I do want to talk briefly just about Constantine like going forward in the future because you know, I think one of the most famous versions of Constantine is, the Keanu Reeves version, which I find very interesting because it is like nothing like the comics at all. I think really my first real introduction to Constantine was the 2015 series, and then obviously Matt Ryan's, played him in the CW verse, in Legends of Tomorrow and in, like I said earlier, the animated movies. And after reading the comics and everything, like his portrayal of Constantine just feels the most accurate to me, even when there's times like in, Legends of Tomorrow or stuff where they like, change his character a bit. I think Matt Ryan is still just like perfect as the character. And, I know there's people that are like huge fans of the Keanu Reeves version, and like I love Keanu Reeves, but he just feels like a completely different character to me. Kind of like what they did with, Joanna Constantine and the Sandman Netflix series. Jenna Coleman does a really good job, but it just feels like a different character. It doesn't feel like Constantine to me. So kind of same thing with the Keanu Reeves version. I have heard that they're making a sequel, which is cool. I mean the first movie is good, but I really want to see like I don't I'm guessing they're probably not going to keep Matt Ryan as the character in the DCU, but I do hope that we get to see the DCU version of Constantine sooner rather than later because I feel like we really deserve like a really good, accurate movie version of Constantine that we really haven't seen. And honestly, I think it'd be a really cool idea to introduce him in the Swamp Thing movie that's going to be coming out, directed by James Mangold, because, obviously Constantine first showed up in the Swamp Thing comics, and it seems like they're basing this new movie on the Alan Moore Swamp Thing comics. So I think that'll be a really cool idea, even if it's just like a cameo, to introduce the new like DCU Constantine. And it would be cool to have him, be have like a larger role in the DCU, maybe in like a Justice League Dark or even like in his own franchise. But yeah, those are just my thoughts on Constantine. Any Constantine fans, let me know in the comments what you want to see, for Constantine going forward in movies and all that stuff. So before I wrap things up, I want to talk about my cultured picks for the week. Now, our cultured picks are basically just some comics we've read recently, usually more recent ones that we thought were good or at least worthy of note and worth talking about, that are beyond the scope of the book of the week. So, first off, I want to talk about Chasm Curse of Cain, issue 1. I think there's been like 4 issues out now, but I've only been able to get my hands on the first issue. But I'm a big fan of Cain. I'm a big fan of Ben Reilly, who is now Chasm. I think Chasm's honestly a really badass look for him. I've really been enjoying that, even though, like they've kind of been putting, Ben through the ringer, but I think Chasm's still a cool character. So seeing them in the same comic is really cool. Having like the clones meet up again is really cool. And something I found interesting was it seems like the villain that they're teeing up to be, the main villain of the series is Druig, the Eternal, which I was not expecting. So that's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see Chasm and Cain go up against an Eternal. I'm very curious how that goes down, and I'm sure a lot's probably happened so far that I'm oblivious to because I haven't read it yet. But lastly, I do want to talk about Justice League Unlimited, which came out not this past week, but the week before. If you're a Justice League fan, if you've been a fan of like Absolute Power and all the stuff that Mark Waid and Dan Mora have been doing, definitely check this out. It was, it's definitely more of just kind of a starting point, but it just feels like the coolest Justice League that we've seen in a long time. And obviously, the Justice League has been on hiatus for a while, and they were replaced by the Titans, which probably not the best idea, but it feels like the Justice League is back and stronger than ever, and it feels very much like there's a lot of nods to the 2000s animated series, Justice League Unlimited. Like even, see the title card or the title page has the, backlit like sunlight with shadows look that the series always had. So I thought that was very cool. But the story itself was interesting, and it sets up a lot of cool stuff. But there's a lot of, the way they're sending the Justice League off into like these specific teams is very cool and very well coordinated. And Red Tornado seems to be like the one controlling all this stuff because he's like the AI of the Watchtower now. And we also see Airwave, who played a pretty big role in Absolute Power. He has a surprisingly large role in this as a new Justice League member. But they also set up some things at the end. I'm not going to spoil it, but they basically set up future stories where there's going to be a traitor in their midst. And yeah, that's definitely interesting. But yeah, I would definitely suggest picking up Justice League Unlimited. And yeah, I'm definitely going to keep reading this series. Hopefully it gets even better. But that is the end of the episode for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like and subscribe and follow The Cultured Nerd on social media. You can scan the QR code on the bottom left if you're watching at home. And if you want to check out Casual Experts, my other brand where I have another podcast, Casual Experts Only, and my own social media, just, all about nerdy stuff from a thoughtful perspective, thoughtful, balanced, takes on things. Or at least I try. You can scan the QR code on the bottom right to check out all that stuff. And if you would like to help support us so we can keep bringing you more great content, check out the patreon.com/theculturednerd. And if you want to support the Cultured Pull List specifically, look for the show's tier on that Patreon page. Thank you to all the current Patreon supporters of The Cultured Nerd. I've been your host, Michael Malillo, flying solo like I have lately, as Luke has been on hiatus. Our logo and visual assets were designed by Jose Navarro, and our intro was designed by myself. Once again, thank you for joining me this week, I'll see you next time.